you doing? Thank you. How are you? Thank you very much. So thank you for taking the time and attending this workshop. I have a couple of questions before we get started. So who here works as a web developer? Web developer. Okay. Surprising. Who here has tried Astro before? Okay, that's good. Who here uses any other front-end framework? Preact, Vue, Angular. Okay, which ones do you use? Preact. And just shout at me.
Preact.
Angular.
Svelte.
Use Next one. Okay. Which one?
Next.
Next. Okay. So for those of you, well, you're the only one who use Next. Astro is going to be. It will show some similarities to what Next.js is doing. For everyone else who does React, it will. Astro has syntax that is very similar to some JSX, which is good, and to Angular in a sense. And then we're also going to see what else you can do with React in Astro. So, what I've prepared for is another question. So, is this is that large enough for everyone to see? Good. Okay, and then what about this? That should be okay. That's about the same size. Okay, cool. So the very first thing I want to share with you is the resource that I've prepared for this workshop. So there's a GitHub repository. Okay, so that's github.com/tpios/astro-workshop. So what I'll try to attempt is put together that application in the duration of these 2 hours. Should I fail that, then everything is there. Okay. Also, please note that the README is essentially the material. Okay, so if you start from the first README file, you have all sorts of information like what you need to have installed, etc., etc. And there's a breakdown for lessons. And so if you click into any of these, then you will find all the information, all the stuff that I'm going to explain, added to the repository. Okay, so that's that. Now, when I was preparing for this, and just as you are, so when I was preparing for this workshop, I didn't know what to do, right? Option A was I build an application that is, maybe an e-commerce shop or a blog or something that is use case driven, or I build something where I don't really care about the use case, but I show as many features of Astro as I can, right? So which one do? Do you show 2 or 3 features, but you build something? Or do you try to show everything because I don't know what you want to learn? So I went with option B, whereby I create an application that has everything, right? This is not like a use case application. There's no real logic to it. I just want to showcase as many capabilities of Astro as I can. Okay, so that's essentially the plan. Now, most of the time I'll sit down, okay, because I need to type and I try to do some live coding. So just before I start, so very briefly, also the title of this workshop is Ship Less JavaScript with Astro, right? The reason why I call this workshop, and there's a recorded version of this as well, by the way, but the reason why I call it, Ship Less JavaScript is because Astro's intention is really to try to ship, as minimalistic JavaScript as humanly possible. Right, so if there's no JavaScript needed on the page, Astro is not going to add it to your final bundle. It's not going to need it. If JavaScript is needed on a particular page or for the entire project, because let's face it, evidently, you need JavaScript on the web. Then there are certain strategies that you can use to determine how that JavaScript gets loaded. Okay, but we're going to talk about that when we get there. So I'm going to just sit down real quick. And then I'm going to get started. So do make sure that you have. I'm not going to go through this since everyone is a web developer of some sort. You need to have the latest version of Node, npm, Git, yada yada, and your favorite code editor installed. Okay, so that's given, and then we're going to start with the basics of Astro. So what I'm going to do is go to my terminal, and we're going to type in, or I'm going to type in npm create Astro at latest, and then we're going to give this a name. Okay, so this is how you start creating your first Astro project. Okay, so Astro at latest would always get the latest version of Astro, and then City.js will be the name of the folder. Very similar to Next.js, npm create Astro also supports templates. So if you have a template, you have it on GitHub, you can then reference that with, I think, -- template, but it should be somewhere in the description. If it's not there, then of course it's in the Astro docs. Okay, so we just say yes to that. Then we're going to get a couple of questions asked. I'm going to go with an empty, project. I want to install dependencies. Which I see someone's t-shirt. It says npm install and chill. Pretty much. Coffee, things like the other thing is, you see that I'm using Astro 2.1. So I used Astro before it was actually really like a beta release. And the next time I used it was after 2.0. And there are some very interesting changes. And I've also included that plus as of 2.1. They have some additional changes, and I have incorporated some of that into this workshop. But those are experimental and should be treated as experimental, which means do not try to use that in production just yet. Do you plan to write TypeScript? Yes. Yes. Just to get things going, I mean, relax on TypeScript. Okay. Initialize a new Git repository. Yes. Why not? Okay, and then we're done. Right, so now all you need to do is open up your Astro project, and voila, here is everything that we created. So we get the usual stuff, package JSON, etc., etc. There are two things I want to point out here. There's Astro config.mjs, which allows you to sort of fine-tune some of the settings of Astro. We're going to come here to enable some experimental features of Astro, if we'll have the time to do so. And of course, the majority of the work would be in the src folder. Okay. So out of the box, you see that when you create an Astro project, you have a source folder which contains a pages directory, and in there you have an index.astro file. Okay, so Astro will essentially render the final page or final set of pages of the entire application based on the content that you have placed in the pages folder. And again, very similar to Next.js or any of these sort of meta front-end framework that got very popular with the Jamstack architecture, Astro also has a file-based routing. Okay, so what that means is that every single .astro file that you put into the pages folder will reflect the root within your application. Now, the other important thing to note is that you can have not just .astro files, but you can also have the HTML files in here, .md, so Markdown files, JSX, TSX, and Vue files as well. Let me check my notes here. Sorry, .js.ts. Okay, so MDX, MD, .astro, HTML, JS, and TS. Okay, not JSX. Sorry, that was something else. Okay, so if you have any of these files, then that means that that is going to be rendered or built as a page. Now, if you have .js or .ts, those would be a special API endpoint, okay, which we'll talk about in. So let's open this index.astro file up. And really, when you look at any Astro file, it can have 2 or maybe 3 sections. Okay, so you can basically split it into 2 sections or 3, depending on how you it. The first one is the top section, which is called the from meta section. So if you've used Markdown before, you use these 3 dotted lines, or sorry, 3 dashed lines. And this is the place where you would store metadata about the Markdown file itself, right? In Astro, what you put here, in between these dashes in the from meta part of your Astro file, is server-side JavaScript. Okay, so any JavaScript can go in here from variable declarations to fetch API requests to pretty much anything. Okay, so that's the first section of the file. Second section is clearly this, HTML. Okay, so that is what Astro is going to display when you create a build, when you run this in production. Okay, so that's what the browser is going to receive. And the reason why I say that, maybe you can think of this as having 3 sections is because, we're going to talk about layouts in a second, but here, as opposed to having all of this, you could just have a div, okay, with some, with some whatever content. And this JavaScript here, as I said, is going to be executed server-side, but I'm going to clarify that in just a second. But what if you want to have some client-side JavaScript? Then all you need to do is just add the script element in here, and now you can write some client-side JavaScript, okay? So what is this, JavaScript on the top? One of the most important things that you need to understand about Astro is the fact that it builds all these pages at build time. Okay, and it does what I think they refer to as static build. Okay, so what that means, you build your application, you put your Astro files and some other files in place, you build the application, then at build time, all the JavaScript in the front matter is going to be executed. So let's say you fetch request to grab products from a CMS, then you put that content into the div. All of that work, that fetch request, etc., is going to be done at build time. And so once Astro is finished with the build, this formatted JavaScript essentially is gone. It's no longer needed, right? Because it's only needed and required for the build of the project, or when you build the project. Okay? But let's take a look at this just now. So let me put this back here. And let's say that I want to have a name here, and then I want to say hello, and then how do you access the variables that you've created in the front method? You use curly braces, like so. Okay, so any variable or anything that you declare on top here in the front method is accessible inside your HTML. Okay, so now we save this, and I do npm run. Yeah. Then I get a developer server. Let's touch this screen. Let's do it here. Let's do it here. Okay, and now I have hello job, right? And this particular page, so if I were to create a build, and if we check the final output of the build, all I get is just the HTML with hello job, right? Because that interpolation of the variable and the JavaScript execution happened at build time, when I actually executed npm run build. Does this make sense so far? By the way, any questions? Interrupt me at any point. Okay. Cool. Now, let's also talk about routing a little bit. So I'm going to create a new file. Let's call that. So let's call that about Astro, classic example. Put some HTML in here as well. And just say this is the about page. Okay, so now guess what happens if I go to localhost 3000/about, I get the about page. Now, in React, Next, Angular, or any of these frameworks, when you have to link between one page to the other, you have to use a a link component or something that's very specific to the framework itself. Okay. Or in Angular is the router link directly. And so that's not the case with Astro. Okay, so in Astro, all you need to do is just add a classic old-fashioned Angular element with an href2/about. Okay, so there's no link element, there's nothing. So all you need to do is say, okay, go to about page, and then that's just great. Okay, that's it. So there's no fancy, let's bring another component to do something that you can just do. Okay, so far, hopefully this is straightforward to understand and not very difficult. What you have probably noticed is that the HTML is the same for both the index page and the about page, right? So I entered all the headers, the HTML element, the body, and this is not really good because this is
repetitive, I have to copy the whole HTML structure. So what you can do, you can break this up into, you can create a layout, and then you can break these parts of your page into components, and then you can just import these components. Okay? So very simply, and again, there's no real, whether you call your file layout or Astro or whatever, it's up to you. In the, I'll just show you what I talked about. So I think in the final project, I just created a folder called layouts and I put everything in there. So I just tried to replicate this. If you want to call that base.astro or whatever the Astro, doesn't matter. Okay, it's up to you. So it's not really a naming convention. It's also not really necessary and required to have a layouts folder. But to me, it made sense, so I went with it. Okay. Now let's try to replicate it as closely as possible. So I'm going to create a folder here called layouts, and I'm going to create a file in here called layout.astro. And again, since this is an Astro file, we have access to a from meta, and we have access to the HTML part of the Astro file. So I'm just going to create all of this, and this is going to be our layout, right? So the content that I want to change is essentially what I've highlighted now, right? So lines 14 to 15 is where I want to place my content. So how can I do that? In Astro, there's a built-in component/element that you can use to indicate where you want to inject the content of the index page, or the about page, etc., etc. That is simply called slot. Okay, so you create a slot. You want to, essentially load. In this case, we only have two files, so the content from index and from about Astro should be loaded into this slot. You can, of course, also do some other things. I think I could create a head.astro. Just do that as well. So I'm just going to copy all of this in here. And if you just do this, you can actually export the content of the head.astro. Export. Okay, so I import head from head.astro, and all I need to do is just reference that. Okay, and that's it. Notice that there was no JavaScript that I added into this Astro file, although I can, and you should, but we're going to talk about that later. And then I could import that entire thing and just use that as a component. Okay, now, taking that to the next level a little bit, inside the head component, I have the title. So what if I have, going with an e-commerce example, for example, what if I want to have a different title per product page? So if I'm, looking at a shoe, I want the title to say, oh, this is, a Nike shoe. If I'm on another page, I want the title to basically dynamically change based on what I'm looking at. Okay? So how to do that? Astro. First of all, you kind of notice here, Astro has a global object with a capital A. On that global object, there are a bunch of properties that you can access. Generator is one of them, but there are others. There are some built-in ones, but there are some that you can attach to that. Very similar again to how Preact works with props, right? Whereby you have components and then you can pass properties to those components. You can do the same with Astro files as well. What I mean by that is you can, since head.astro, so head.astro is a component, there's nothing stopping me from sending properties to this component. Okay, so for example, I could set the title to be, actually we wouldn't do this in the, let's do this, but changes. So let's say the title is title, and then you have to have a place where title comes from. So where does it come from? Where does it come from? You do astro.props, and then dot, and then whatever the prop that you send to Astro. Okay, so in this case, let's call it title. And so all you need to do is That's the overall thing. I want the title in the layout. I want to read it here. And I explained a wrong concept in the wrong file. But no, okay, so this is head.astro. In head.astro, I want to grab the title as a prop, and then I want to display a title. And so what I can do in my layout prop, I can say title is equal to okay, so if I save, now hopefully the title.
You are index.
I did what?
You import it in index as well.
Okay, because we're not using it here. So let's do the following. So we have the slots, so let's enter something in here. H1 is the next page. H1 is the event page. Okay, so this is the index page. And then the about page is this about page, and we'll fix the title in just a second. Okay. So then in my so in my index.astro file, I now need to apply the layout itself. Okay, so all I need to do is say import layout from one level up. Layout.astro, and then I just need to call layout, and I need to wrap the entire content in that layout, right? So in this case, now you can see that the H1 is basically going to be sent to layout.astro, and slot is essentially going to be whatever content I put in between the layout elements, or the layout tags in this case. Okay, does it make sense so far? Okay. Okay, and now you see that the title is now test. Now, of course, it doesn't really make sense to set the title on the head, but you could potentially do this in a way that I've done it in the demo, which is take the title out from the head, put it in the layout, and just use the layout, this here, and just use the layout to send a use the layout and send the title prop. So you can say this is the home page, and then on the about page you can now send a different title. Okay, so now you have the whole page.
You have imported negative.
But usually, so Visual Studio Code does the. Okay, so now it says about page. Okay, so now we can also use these props. Does this make sense so far? Okay. Now, one more change that I'm going to do here is if you can set the title of the page here as well as a variable, and then you can just reference that. Now, as of I think this was added in 2.2, I can't remember, but if the prop and the variable referencing the prop is the same, you can just use simply curly brace title verticals. That's pretty much it. Okay, so you don't need to explicitly say title equals 2. You can just do this, and the output is going to be the index page. The output is going to be the same. Okay, this is going to complain, but that's the that's Visual Studio. Okay, the code still works. That's fine. You can do something which I think I've done in the what is it called, the trick to get rid of this. That's your homework. Okay, so in Visual Studio Code, you can do something to get rid of this error. I forget about it. But I think you need to maybe install.
Can you increase speed up a little bit?
I can try.
Yeah. Thank you.
Is there a microphone that I can use here? Because that would be easier for me and then for you. Is it this one? And it'll shoot it. Hello. Yes. Where was I? Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. But here's what I'm thinking. As opposed to me typing and explaining, what I'll do at this point, just to save some time, is I'm going to open up my application and then start going through the individual pages that I created, explaining the features of Astro. I think that's going to be better. But I just wanted to show this to you because this is really important to understand, right? Build like JavaScript, how you can reference that, set props, because once you get this, the rest is just up to your JavaScript. Okay? Yes.
That was how it goes now.
Please.
If you wanted to basically put the title, not just on the layout, but on the head, but still get it from the layout, would you need to probably from here?
Yes.
Yeah, probably only go the way down.
Okay, so please stop. Okay, so the only difference is that I have a bunch of additional files, of course, in here. But let's look at the pages, right? So I have a couple of pages in here. I have an index of Astro file, which does use the layout as the title. So this is what I've explained up until this point, okay? The other thing that I want to show you here is if I go to layout and footer, here's an example of using some client-side JavaScript, okay? And all you need to do is literally just rely on your JavaScript knowledge, okay? So as you can see here, even though I'm in a .astro file, I can just use, query selector, I can use new data, you can write any sort of client-side JavaScript in here. So the only thing that's happening here is that when I have a copyright text, I inject the full year from client-side JavaScript. Now, why would I do that? This is not really a trick question, but what's your, why would I do that as opposed to, using the formatter and just say, const date or, const copyright is equal to, and then use this and then just, edit into the HTML like that. Why am I not doing that versus why I'm using the client-side JavaScript? Correct. Okay, so this is where it's important to understand that this JavaScript here gets executed when I create a build of this project. So if I do a build, let's say on 30th of December 2013, the date is going to be 2013, and if I don't deploy in 2014 at all, it's still going to say copyright 2023. So that's why I use some client-side JavaScript in here to always get the right information. And actually, let me just show you this, the final project. I'm going to say that I'm not very good at design. Okay, so that's, it took me like half a day to put this together. But these are, the individual menu items are individual talking points that we're going to go through. Okay, so there's a blog, again, just some random blog posts here. There's a fetch endpoint, which does something very specific. There's a product endpoint, graphical endpoint, a product by API, a React endpoint, which doesn't do anything until you scroll down, and then image optimization, which we're going to talk about later as well. There's the about page, which deliberately does this. And the reason why it's doing this is because you can actually customize 54 pages. Okay, so they deliberately didn't add a .about.astro file. But if you add a folder of Astro, this is going to be a sort of catch-all for any groups that are, that do not exist in the app and you try to load it. Okay, so that's a deliberate, old loop message there. Okay, so let's go one by one. Block. Now, this is in post on Astro. Now, this is one of the things that Astro released in version 2, which is the collections. Okay, collections essentially allow you to specify content. I think it's called content collections actually. So it allows you to specify content pieces. You can also apply schema to that content, and then Astro essentially has all this functionality that you need to display that content and generate pages based on that. So in post.astro, notice I'm using this thing, let's just focus on this. Get collection blog, and it's imported from Astro content. So Astro content is this new thing that was added in 2.0. But what does it do? What is get collection blog? Where does it know that there's a blog collection that you can then iterate through using a map? So that's when we need to go into the content folder. The content folder itself is a reserved folder in Astro, a reserved folder name in Astro. Okay, so you can't use the content folder to put whatever stuff you want in there. You need to use this folder to put content that you wish to use via the Astro content methods that are available. Now, you can create as many subfolders in here, or you don't need to create a folder, it doesn't really matter. But if you have multiple pieces of content, then it makes sense to kind of put those into separate folders. And one example, I think that's the example that I used on GitHub for the README, is let's say you have a developer blog and you have a programmer. Right? So beautiful example where you have a content folder and you have these two subfolders to separate the content. Then the blog content will have is a bunch of Markdown files. Okay? So you can have any number of Markdown files in here. I have some metadata, again in from meta attached to these Markdown files, and the rest is just all the names. Now, you have these Markdown files, you have your blog content, everything is ready. The next thing that you could do is to create a config.ts file. Or you could create a config.ts file and then start adding your content. Now config.ts uses this wonderful thing called Preact, which is short for ZOD, and it's a typing system that you can use to define how the schema for the content that you want to add looks like. So in this case, notice that I said, okay, so any Markdown file in my global collection, my global content collection, should have a title, an author, a date, and a description. And therefore, that should match the format that you have in your Markdown files. Any deviation from the schema that I've specified is going to yield a warning or error. We'll check that when you try to build your post. Okay? And you can say that, okay, title is a string, date is actual date, and you have access to all sorts of data types in here. So let's get one. Okay, so you have all of these data types, string, tuple, number, etc., that you can use and map it against your content. Okay, the full list is documented on Astro's website. But let's say that maybe I forget to add this, then I'm going to get an error that says, okay, so there is a invalid content entry format error, and it says, okay, it doesn't match your collection schema, and because the description is required. But maybe that's very hard to see, but it is there. Okay, so once you build a schema, you need to match that in your Markdown files. Okay, and I think you can make some of these optional. So that could be, I think you can chain. So I could say dot optional, of course, and now if the description is there, it's great. If it's not, it's fine. Sure.
So how the type of match How is it like this improves for this particular structure?
That's done by Astro behind the scenes.
But how does it like the two objects look similar, but I want to apply different types to it? How does Astro match it?
So let's say if the author wants a string, or maybe in another post it's an array of authors.
Yeah, or it could be like in some case that I have a boolean flag in one type and I don't have a boolean flag in another type. So, but I have different structures for both of these types. So how Astro make?
Okay, I think you can word these as well. Let's check that. Astro the build, and what we're looking for is the content. Search for Zod. So Zod is the Z, the Z, right, which uses that. I don't know if it's full, it should be fully documented somewhere on this page.
Zod also supports unions.
Alright, but does it support order?
Pardon?
Does it support order?
Or,
Yeah.
yeah, that's like a TypeScript union.
Oh, okay, okay. So you would use that. So you would say string or boolean.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's one part, right? And if you have multiple collections, then you would create another variable is a const, enterprise block collection defined different schema, and then you can export that again. Okay. Now once you do that, and notice I have collections and I have block that references the block collection. Once you do that, that's when you essentially enable. That's when you essentially enable this. So get collection block is essentially going to reference the block collection that you have. Okay, and it's going to just generate the block entries, the entries from that collection. Noting that you have slug and a couple of other properties that are automatically added by Astro itself. Okay, so slug is not something that I've specified. Right, so there's no slug in here, but then based on the file name, Astro is just going to populate the links in this case accordingly. Okay, so if I go back to the example here, and if I hover my mouse over it, I can't do that at the same time. But anyway, you see that this one is first dash post, second dash post, third dash post. So all of that is, that slug is created by Astro. I don't need to have a slug property in my formatter framework. Now the other question is, this is the first time we're going to talk about this, which is, I now have a root which is post / something, right? So this is now, I need to have an Astro file that would capture this root. But of course it's not viable to create the individual .astro files for all these block entries because you would have multiple entries. You could have hundreds of, or maybe thousands of Astro files to create, which is not going to be the case. You would not be doing that. And if you go to the post folder, you will find that you can use the triple dot name.astro naming convention, making sure that you use the square brackets. And so what this does is going to basically capture anything that goes to the post folder. Now there are two types of roots that I want to talk to you about here. There's the one without the rest parameters, there's one without, with and without. So you could have a root essentially in Astro in square brackets and say author closed of Astro. In that case, Astro would go, so well, let's just do that. Let's explain it on the fly. So let's say I have a pages, new folder, workshop, so now I'm getting there, I will put author.astro. Okay, so in this case, if I go to my site and I go to local 3000/workshops/ whatever, then whatever is going to be captured by this root. The difference between this one and using the 3 dots or the rest terms in the file name is that in this case, if I send undefined, so if I don't send anything, that's going to be equal to a /index. If that makes sense. Okay, so that's a very subtle but very important difference. The other important thing to note here is that whatever you put here as the name of the file is something that you will be able to grab as the params. Okay. So if I have slug, then I need to reference that as slug. If I call it something else, that's what I would need to reference. So again, naming the file would matter in this case. And there's something else, and this is again going to be very important to comprehend. So I'll try to explain this, and I'm deliberately hiding this first line and the second line here. Okay, let's just focus on this. So this is how the page looks like for displaying the individual articles or individual posts from this total legend blog that I have here. And I want to talk to you about this getStaticPaths function. So based on what I said at the very beginning is that if Astro is going to create a build, define a build when you type in a build, if you have a dynamic root, such as post/slug.astro, how would Astro know what files that it needs to generate? How does it know that it needs to create first -post.html, second post.html, so on and so forth? And that's when getStaticPaths come into play. And again, if you use Next.js, then you know exactly what this is. But basically, this is how you tell Astro what are the parameters, what are the potential roots that it needs to generate. Okay, so getStaticPaths, and let's just focus on this here. getStaticPaths is going to again grab all the posts from using getCollection blocks. So you will have all the post entries, and what matters is that the return part of getStaticPaths must at all times return the params and potentially props. Now let's ignore props, but let's just focus on params. So params, in this case, because I called the root slug, must return a slug, obviously within a value. Now entry.slug, entry is going to be the individual content pieces, which remember, Astro automatically attaches a .slug property to. And so what this does is going to return me an array that looks like this, params, slug first post. Okay, that's going to be a string, but it doesn't matter. Then params slug second post. Okay, so this is what this getStaticPaths is going to return. And so I'm going to get a list of all the individual root entries, so that now Astro knows, okay, these are the 200, 300,000, etc. roots that I need to generate. Does this make sense? So you're kind of telling Astro what it should be looking for and what it should generate. And again, just to reiterate, posts comes from getCollection block, which we specify like here. It has all the content plus some actions plus some added properties, which one of them is a slug, which is automatically added by Astro, which is just going to be the slug of the content piece. Okay. Astro also supports pagination, but that's in the docs. So if you have hundreds of posts, you don't need to list all of them. You can break it up into paginated pages. Again, just have a look at the docs to see how that works. Yes?
On a prior topic, so I don't know if I missed it or you explained that, but on config, yes, like the schema and log, how is it getting associated? Because here you export, but in each log post you don't actually import it, right? So here you define the schema for the log kind of pages, But let's say I have like recipes for cookies, that how do I define a schema for them? Is it
Okay, so it's
defined in
all
the folder?
yeah. So it's all driven in the content folder. So the content folder, I said that it's a built-in folder that is reserved for any content piece that you want to have. And then you can put folders, or you can put the markdown files, but if you have multiple pieces of content, then you would put that into these individual folders, and then in one config file, you would define another recipe collection, and then you define which is done, and just export it as recipes, recipe collection, and then now you can, in here,
So it's a naming convention thing, like my directory name has to be called recipes, like it's for
the directory name.
Because otherwise, how it knows to it's the same file referencing it to like two different collections, schemas.
I think that's an item name, but I think it's the folder name.
Maybe the folder name.
But we can test that, right? Let's just get rid of everything I did. There we go. Yes. Okay, so that's okay, so it's a folder.
The folder name. Okay, so it just matches those.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Recipe, oh yeah, okay, let's try it now. It may have been, okay, no, it's the folder.
Thanks.
Okay. Also notice that we have this wonderful thing here called the weight entry.render. So what Astro does, other than all this cool stuff about getting the collection, defining the scheme, etc., is it allows, or it has the capacity to render the markdown for us. So all you need to do is that in your build on JavaScript, you can call entry.render. That is going to give access to a content component for you, and all you need to do is just call content. So if you do this, by default, Astro is going to render the markdown for you in HTML. Okay? Now, you can customize how that looks like. Again, I'll just defer to the docs for you to see that, but there are ways that you can change how the actual markdown content is displayed. But if you're, if you don't want to do all of that work, then just know that all you need to do is call entry.render, which is going to essentially take your markdown, render it as HTML, and to access that, you can just use the content property as such. And that's why if I now go to any of these posts, and I think I added tailwinds, what was it called? Not the typography plugin. You use it as, all you need to do is you install that with Tailwind, and then you add a pros class to the div or the whatever element you want to use to display your markdown, and it's going to style it for you according to some built-in basics. So that's what I did. But you see, I have the list. I have the H1s, the H2s. I have the block quotes. I have the this is a link, etc. So everything that was in markdown is now rendered as HTML. And I haven't done anything except for calling the weight entry.render and just use this content. Okay. But again, if you want to customize this or change something, then go to Astro's docs, and there's a whole section that actually talks about that. Okay, so that's the first example. So content collections was added in 2.0. You had to do this really differently in previous versions. Okay, the next example that I want to talk to you about is fetch. So fetch with Astro. Actually, let me just go to it was fetch with Astro. So in here, again, just showing you that you can use modern web APIs in your Astro files. Okay, so if you just want to go and grab information from REST API, you can just use the Fetch API out of the box without any issues. Now, what this particular example is doing is, I don't know if you noticed, but there's a Star Wars API, it's free to use. So it goes to the Star Wars API, sends a random ID, which I set here, and grabs information about the Star Wars character. I then feed that data to a Star Wars character component. And again, this is not a rule that you have to follow. I just like to put all these components into source/components. If you want to do it in another way, then of course you have more flexibility to do so. And then in this Astro character, I destructure data from Astro.props. I then destructure name and height from the actual data, and I just use my layout and present some content. Okay, so all this is going to do now is every time when I refresh this page, it's going to make a Fetch API request to the Star Wars API and just going to render a different Star Wars character. Now this is happening in development, but what do you think happens when I create a build? Okay, so let me ask you a little bit. Let's assume that this is the final build of my project and I'm on the /fetch roots. If I refresh the page, would I see Chewbacca? After refreshing, would I see someone else? Okay, who says same? Who says different? 50-50. It's going to be the same. Okay? Remember why. This JavaScript, but that as well, it doesn't matter. So this JavaScript is only executed when I create a build. So when I create a build, it's going to, make a fetch, get a random character, whatever, whoever that is going to be. It's going to, hard-coding that into the HTML, and that's the build. That's it. There's not going to be any JavaScript on that page. It's going to be serial JavaScript. Hence, ship as JavaScript. That's what we're trying to do. Okay. So that's just to show you that you can do. You can use any of the web APIs. Anything that you can execute. Any of the web APIs that you want to use, you can probably use that in Astro. Okay, out of the box.
And how would you adjust that to have runtime information?
More on that, it's coming in this moment.
Okay.
I'm getting there.
What does that pre-render thing? Is there?
The
file.
This one, ignore that for now. I'm looking at the final project, and there's a reason why it's there, and I'll explain. That's what I'm trying to hide. It's not there. Okay, it's not there yet. Okay, products. Tamas is jeans, shoes, I think. Oopsie. Oh no, I said I didn't take it, but it's fine. So products. So let's take a look at products of Astro. And this is just showcasing, a custom CMS integration. Astro, let me just go to that page. So in Astro, you can have integrations, okay? And there are UI framework integrations. We're going to talk about that. The SSR adapters, we're going to talk about that. And there are some. There are some CMS integrations as well. Okay, so out of the box, if you use any of these headless CMSs, you just click on these, follow the instructions, and now you have it connected to your Astro project. Now, I deliberately picked one that was not on the list, just to show you that you can do it as well. And the only thing that I want to mention as well, the products, the GraphQL, I think these two endpoints use a CMS that's running on my machine. Okay, because I couldn't be bothered to deploy the entire CMS, so I do apologize for that, but it's just going to showcase very simple things. So I'm using Strapi. I don't know if anyone heard about that headless CMS. And it's not on the CMS integration list here, but also the way Strapi works, I don't think it warrants an entire CMS guide section. So what Strapi does, let me just show it to you quick. So localhost, this is the test. Okay, test 1, 2, 3, 4. We did it on 2 combinations. Okay, so I'm not going to do a whole Strapi thing, but you have the content manager, you can set up content types, but notice that I have the product collection within Strapi, within my CMS. I have 3 products added, and then you can expose these from Strapi via a REST API endpoint. Okay, and all I'm doing, of course, because it's a REST API endpoint, all I need to do is go and fetch whatever REST API endpoint I have, and in this case, port 1337/API/products actually returns a JSON structure from my headless CMS. Okay, and what I'm doing now is I'm just displaying that right here. Okay, so you can connect to to any sort of headless CMS if it's REST API based one, or if you're not using a REST API based headless CMS, say content flow, then you can specify your content flow variables, build an interface, install the dependencies, and then do a couple of things, and boom, now you have access to your data from your headless CMS you use. The other thing that I want to show you, and this is these 2 endpoints, or these 2 routes use the same CMS. So GraphQL, again, this is the same data, but represented in a different way. Again, if you have a GraphQL service of some sort, this is going to be very easy to interact with that using Astro. So the details of that are in the GraphQL and Astro file. Again, very interesting. If for those of you who use Astro probably know this, but for those of you who have not, Astro can not only expose the data as a REST API endpoint, but it can also expose it via GraphQL as a GraphQL service. Okay, and that's why you see the port is exactly the same, except as opposed to going to /API/products, I go to /GraphQL. And because, again, I just use the fetch API, right? I can not only use it to get, to do HTTP get, I can use it to HTTP post, put delete, whatever. So I'm making an HTTP post to the GraphQL endpoint, and I send a GraphQL query. Okay, and the query in this case is going to ask for the product information again. Once I have the response, I can then set up a variable here, and I can iterate with it again. All of that stuff, all of that GraphQL request again is going to happen in build time. So by the time I build this page, I'm just going to have a list of these products. Okay. So again, it's pretty much doing the same, but I just want to show you GraphQL. We can do REST API. You can do both of these as a fetch API request. Yes.
Can we do incremental as well? Something like every day it will do a build and then update it.
So
Instead of building once and then serve it. So I guess when you build this one, all this JSONs will convert it into a static state, and then that's how it will be served, right? So,
okay. So in the next example, I show you something which may answer your question. If it doesn't, so it depends what you want to do. So if you're saying that, going back to these products, let's say you add a new product and then you want to display it here, right? You want to have, I don't know, hats, okay? So what you can, that's really up to the, because I've done this before. So what you do is, and it's a workflow, right? So what I've done is, in the headless CMS, if a new entry was added, that then triggered a build, right? So you can do that. But if that's not what you're asking, I'm going to talk about something here which may answer your question. Because if it's something dynamic like what I'm going to show you, then you may need to alter for something else in Astro, which I'll explain in just a second. Quick question. So I've been talking about an hour. Do you want to have a break, or are you okay for me to carry on? Carry on. Did you say you need a break? Any questions so far? That's a solid that way. So let's talk about products via API. So this is so let's think about products. Let's think about a real use case, right? So obviously, if you build an e-commerce site, you want to list your your products, but if the website is statically generated, then how do you update your stock? It's not really realistic to rebuild the project every time someone buys something or something changes. It's just you're going to just constantly rebuild. And a good example here is you have a product listed via it comes in my API. It doesn't really matter, and it says sunglasses current stock is 12. Now if I hit purchase something, I now behind the scenes did purchase something. So if this is a statically built site, it will still show current stock 12, current stock 25, but that's not the case, right? But if I refresh the page, current stock is now 23. Okay. So how did that happen? What did I do? And this is when, this is called Products API Astro. And this is when we need to talk about server-side rendering. Now, the default behavior of Astro is essentially static building the entire project, as you saw it, right? There's no JavaScript, there's no server-side stuff. But there are general use cases such as this one, where you need server-side rendering. Right? You need, every time when you load a page, you need the most up-to-date information of your products, of what's in stock, what's not in stock, what products you have, etc. And that's when you need to update for server-side rendering, right? You want to generate these pages at a request time. So if someone goes to /products, you don't want to show a page that was built, yesterday. You want the server to generate the HTML and you want to display the HTML to your users. So how do we do that? Well, that's fine. We go to Astro, we go to .mjs, and we're just going to concentrate on this single line for now. You specify that the output should be server. Once you make this change, you also change the default behavior of Astro. You basically change it from static, real-time generation to full-blown server-side rendering. Okay, there's no in between. It's either that or the other. So if you had output server, Astro is now going to server render every single page. Okay, so why is it important, and how is it important? So let's just go back to that. Remember the Star Wars example with the random Star Wars characters? So let's just build this now. And then do a okay. I think. So this one would fire up an HTTP server and it's going to provide you with a preview of your production or your final build. Localhost 3000. So 3000 and fetch, right? So if I refer to page, this is what we discussed, right? It's not, Baru, whoever was the person that we got randomly from Star Wars API, and that's what we have set in stone as part of the build. Now, let's say, we change it to server-side rendering mode. I get rid of this slide, which I'll explain to you in just a second. I create another build of this project. And now we will see what does it mean that Astro is now running in server-side rendering mode. Because the behavior of that page is going to be a little different. Okay? Every time I refresh, I get a new character. Why? Because now the page is rendered on the server, so that whole fetch API business happens when I load the page. And again, very important difference. Now, what if you have pages that you don't want to server-side render, i.e. this is what Astro calls hybrid rendering. Okay, so hybrid rendering is a mix between the static side generation and the server-side rendering. All you need to do is add this line. Export const pre-render equals to true. And you add that as the first line to every single Astro page in the front meta that you want to statically generate. Okay? So there's a combination of two things, right? If you added server-side rendering by changing astro.config.mgs to say output server, and if you have pages that you don't want to use server-side rendering, you have to add export const pre-rendered true. Okay, so if I do this, and if I create another production build, then we're going to go back to that default behavior whereby if I refresh the page, we're just going to get one single character. Okay, so it's layer, and it is always going to be layer because this page has been pre-rendered. Okay, make sense? Okay, so in light of all this, and so what I have in this particular products API file is I have a fetch to /API/products.json. So what is /API/products.json is specially coming from astro.url.origin. So astro.url is one of those, again, built-in objects that you can access from the Astro, built-in properties that you can access from the Astro object. And .url will tell you all sorts of information about the actual Astro URL, such as the origin, the path, and there are some other properties that you can access. But then what is this API products.json? So if I go to API, I do have products.json.ts. And the answer is that this is a so-called, how do they call it? They call it server endpoint, I think, in Astro. Two things to notice. The name of the file is actually products.json.ts, but when you reference it, you don't need the .ts or the .js. You can run it JavaScript as well. So you don't need the .ts or the .js extension. So this particular file is very useful for situations when you want to, maybe go to a database of some sort. You want to do some server-side JavaScript action, and you want to expose just some data based on those actions. Now, what you see here is, I'm not using the database; it's just completely made up. So if you go to utils.db.ts, it's just db. Okay, it's just an array. It doesn't, do anything fancy. But this is the place where you would connect to MongoDB, to the SQL, whatever. Right? This is the place where you would do it. And I just expose two functions from here. List products returns my product array, and purchase product is going to find. And I'll tell you more about this in a minute. But purchase product is going to request an ID and a quantity. I'm just going to send maybe 2, and the quantity is going to be 10. And so I'm indicating that I want to buy 10 pieces or 10 pairs of shoes, right? And so in the .astro file, I will go to products.json, and I'm going to iterate. So products.json is So DB, so let me take a step. So DB pretends to be the database that shows you all the products and has the function to purchase a product. Products.json.ts exports two functions, a get and a post, which means that I can send HTTP get and HTTP post requests to this endpoint. There's a special export that you can do, which is export const all, and then you can, essentially handle all HTTP methods. And how do you know what to get, what's a post? You can then reference request. You can call request.method because you have access to the request object in this file. Okay, so if you say you could do something like all, then of course you wouldn't need to get and post. and then in here you have request, and then you could say if request.method was a post, then this is a post, and then get, etc., etc. Not sure why you want to do that, but you can. Otherwise, if you have, if you want to handle get and push requests, then you say export const get. What should happen if someone uses HTTP get? Post. What should happen if someone uses post? And just a note, you can't export const delete. You delete is creating JavaScript keyword, so you do export const del then, which is going to be the handler for the HTTP. Okay, so if I do an HTTP get, what's going to happen? I just grab list products. List products comes from the DB. That's my database query. Okay, and I just return the products. And so in the products API, fetch. So even if this page is deployed, it's always going to get a deployment URL /API/products.json. And then I just iterate through the products and I display the step. Okay, so far so good. Now the button and the handler for the button is client-side JavaScript. So what I do in the client-side JavaScript, I send an API request to render product.json. Actually, is that two and this is because I have this file as well. Okay, let's talk about this file. Let's just talk about everything that's in the API folder. So there was products.json listing products. There's square bracket id.json.ts. Remember the naming convention of square brackets, or square braces? If I have id in here, that means that the id is going to be a changeable parameter. So just looking at this first line, if I have an export const get, what that means is I can send an HTTP GET request to id.json. What that ID is, it's changeable. So if I make an HTTP GET to 100.json, that's going to be 100 is going to be something I can access as a parameter. Okay, and notice that when I actually write the function for the handler function for the GET, I have access to params, and I can I could have probably destructured it, but it doesn't matter. So I can access the ID. Why is it an ID? Because that's the name of the file. If the name of the file would be ABC, then it would be params.abc. Okay? And then there are some additional things that you can do. Okay, so it's, again, I just completely made this up, but this is completely service-side stuff, right? So you could also make sure that someone sends an API token or a request token or whatever you can think of, service-side stuff to happen, it can happen in this file. And just for fun, I said if the API token abc-123 is not sent, then I'm not even going to execute the purchase request, indicating maybe someone should be logged in, authenticated, authorized, and whatever. And now going back to here, that's why you have this headers API token. So all I'm doing is I'm picking a random product, so it's either going to be 1 or 2, the button press. I send that request again either to 1.json or 2.json, which means that I can now grab that because I have access to that in the params. I send the header token, and basically I'm executing a purchase action. And the whole reason why this works is because I'm using now server-side rendering. Server-side rendering is now on. Now, actually, I could switch that off. So that's actually, I can't even make it work because of the API requests. Maybe I could exports, const, okay, so products from API. So current stock 12, current stock 25. If I purchase something, and if I refresh the page, it still works. Because I would have to do, because it's okay. So if you don't have server-side rendering, this wouldn't work as well. I don't want to revert all of them back, okay, because let's not get into that now. But does this make sense? So if you have something like this where you want to have where you want to show the most up-to-date information
like a product listing or something from, based on database queries, etc., then you must use server-side rendering. You can't use static rendering code. And this is, I said there's going to be another answer to the question where you rendering. This is as well. So
Is that distinction between static and dynamic only doable on a page level, or also further down on page level, on page level?
that's why, if you look in most of this file, I would have, because once you, so it's a big switch. So if you leave the default, it's static rendering. If you put the output server, everything is server rendering. Now, if you want both, then yes, it's basically you tell Astro, pre-render this, not that, this.
Yeah. But there's no like on-all to React server components, for example. And but in validation, are there possibilities?
Invalidation.
Yeah.
Invalidation of,
Pre-rendered pages.
what do you mean by that?
For example, for your shopping cart or for your shopping example, or your CMS example,
Okay.
where you will static generate the pages for maximum 0 performance or whatever. But then once it's changed, you might not want to rebuild the whole page or the whole site, but only certain pages.
No, so in that case, so if you know that you have, let's say the product data from the CMS, and you want to show again the quantities that you have left in stock, etc., then that page you wouldn't put const pre-rendered true. You would need to server render that, right? Because even in this example, was it products of Astro? I'm assuming this is a static list coming from the CMS via the fetch API request. If I don't have that, this page would just be server rendered. So whatever this fetch returns, and every request would be most up to date.
Right. But then you would either always have a page pre-rendered or always dynamically server-side rendered.
Server rendered, correct.
That's kind of the question that I asked initially. Like, it's an incremental server-side render would do a common approach.
Okay. So
Cache the pages in between, and only when this request changes, it would flush the new request. It would.
yeah, I'm not aware that that's possible in Astro.
One more question. So if I want to have multiple parameters like ID.json, so I need to have like ID and page multiple parameters.
You would do that by, you could separate it with a dash or whatever. There's no sort. So I think I have that example in the README somewhere. Layouts. Yeah, here. It's not very visible, right? So in this case, the city and country will both be changeable parameters. And then you can also intermix that with the rest parameters. So you could say, and this could be, I think this could be, I can't remember if these would apply to folders as well. I don't think so. It wouldn't make sense. No, but what you can do, you could say, dot city dash just country or something. But there are multiple, you can say multiple parameters, and then if you do that, and again, this is just showing the, there's definitely a typo in here, because that should be in a new line, so I'll fix that later. But if you remember get static paths, when you don't have server-side rendering, you need to tell Astro, and by the way, get static paths you can't use it if you have server-side rendering, because it doesn't make sense anymore, right? But if you have the static rendering, then get static paths, and if you have multiple parameters, then you need to make sure that the actual array that you return from get static paths shows both of those parameters. So in this case, destination and then city as well. But I do need to fix this in book this example. I'll fix that. Okay, that sorry, it's here. Right, that's what you need to return if you have multiple parameters.
So for example, if you have, let's say, a staff page in your website for your company, your markdown files are named after your staff. And then you can break down, let's say, the name dash the OpenSwag experience. And that page would just rank the experience.
You can slice and dice in any.
Can you use middleware for the API routes like Express.js?
Yeah. Like you could. I'm not sure about Express because that's like a whole HTTP.
Yeah.
But you could use packages from NPM in here. So let's say if I were being connected to Mongo, I would have to install the Mongo Node.js SDK, etc., and then I would use it here. But I'm not sure about Express.
Kind of a middleware, like before the request gets received to the handler, particular handler, it would have an intermediate function where it gets executed somehow. For example, if I have to handle the XAPI token for all of my requests, then I would handle it in a centralized place called a middleware.
You could, so in these API routes, you have access to the whole request object. So that means you could put some middleware function in utils or in the middleware folder, write that logic, and then just import it here. If that makes sense. And then you could now do, the whatever you want to do with the token or whatever. And then, you could also say, if I don't send the right API, actually, I can do that here. If I don't send it, then you can, of course, just construct a new response object as well. So for this, there's no, again, depending on what you need to do, but I'm always in favor of not installing stuff that we don't need. If you can write it, then you just write it. You can write all the middleware functions, because again, that's just going to be JavaScript that you have to write in here to implement all your logic in there. You export, import, whatever, use what you want. That's pretty much it. Okay. So about 25 minutes to go. All right, here comes one of the most interesting things with Astro, which when I first heard about it, I kind of wanted to try this. And that is the fact that you can import components from some other frameworks, like Preact. And I'm just going to show you the Preact example. And do you notice you can use integrations? You can use any of these. So here's Preact, Solid, Svelte, Vue, Lit, etc., etc. Okay, so if you have components or stuff built in any of these particular frameworks, you can theoretically just bring it over to your Astro project and use it. Now, the example that I'm going to give you is exactly that. So I have gallery.jsx. Okay, so this is a gallery, uses swipe up. Just to simplify things, I'm just using a local data file again, so it's destinations.json. You will see what this does in just a second. And this is a full-blown React component that uses a React-specific package, and it does something, okay? And all I had to do was just add it into my components folder. In React Astro. You can import it, and of course, if I would have a view file, I would just file from whatever component.view. That would work as well. And that's what makes it about the client attribute. So the default behavior, let me show you that this actually works. So if I go to React, this is the component. Okay, so this is the React component now inside my Astro project. Okay, and I didn't change anything, it was in a React project, and I thought, okay, if Astro advertises themselves as being able to run React components, I thought, okay, I can drag it, drop it over, and I was like, it works. And it does. So, but let's talk about that, this client stuff before I explain, the rest of it. But actually, there's not much to explain. Import, lit view React component and use it as you would use it in a React project. Okay, that's pretty much it. The important thing I need to talk about is this client bit here. And I'm going to cheat because I always forget the options, but that's my this. So this is in. Where would I put this? Over here. Client. Yeah. Maybe. Here. Okay, there we go. So, so default behavior, so that Astro doesn't ship JavaScript. Okay, that's the default behavior. And as such, if you have situations where you do need JavaScript, like you have a React component that has, drag and drop or swiping feature, then you need to somehow add JavaScript to Astro. And there are a bunch of ways that you can do that. And by the way, this is missing code from that, so it's client colon visible. So that's, the loading of the JavaScript is driven by the client attribute. The client attribute either can be load, idle, visible, media, or client only. Now, one of the reasons why this whole Astro thing was created, especially this feature of bringing additional components into your project, is because if you think about a project, you build, using this component-based development method, you create your components and you build up your page using your components. You have the nav, content, a footer, and a side menu, whatever. Many times, if you just think about the nav bar, how much JavaScript does the nav bar need? How much of React.js is actually needed for the nav bar? 1% or nothing, right? And so when I first seen the demo of Astro, they actually did this. Like, hey, here's a React component, which is a nav bar. Let's just add it here, and we don't need any JavaScript, but we can just render the navigation bar. You just want to see the nav bar itself without the additional React library, without any additional JavaScript. And so this whole discussion that we're going to have is driven by that, because you should be in control whether to load some JavaScript or what JavaScript to load. Now, the one that you saw on the page is client visible. So that's how we do it. So client visible means that the JavaScript for whatever component that you have is going to be only loaded if the component is going to be visible in the viewport. Okay? So that's why I kind of have this blank space in here just to demonstrate this. So let's go to the network panel and hit refresh. And all I have here, is client, some micro CSS, and there's no React, even though I'm using a React component in there that must have some React for interactivity. Now, let's just put in this, and now if I keep scrolling down, now I have React. Okay, so I have the actual JSX file and all the React runtime as well added to my project. Why? Because now that particular component is visible on the page. Now, what Astro calls this, and there's a whole sort of paradigm behind this, is called island architecture. Okay, so if you ever look at the Astro docs, or you will listen to a talk, or watch a YouTube video, they will mention this, right? Island architecture. So as opposed to thinking about, and I can actually show this to you, Astro, we have here. It's probably the very first page somewhere. Structure. Just search for islands. There you go. There's a very good explanation for you. Okay. So think about again, just kind of components: header, sidebar, static, footer, etc. You can now determine which of these components will actually require JavaScript input. Okay, so for example, if you have the image cover sort, which is going to be an interactive one, you could say, only load the JavaScript for that, or only load the JavaScript for that when it's part of the viewport, when it's visible. Otherwise, for a sidebar, do you need any JavaScript? Probably not, because it's just a sidebar. But what Astro allows you to do is to still build your still develop your application using some JavaScript, right? The front end, you can have its JavaScript, fetch API, etc. But when it builds it, the sidebar will have no JavaScript shape. But places that require JavaScript allows you to actually have that. And these are the directives again. Okay, so client visible only loads the required JavaScript when the element is visible. Client load. If you have a situation where you know that you need JavaScript for a particular page, for a particular component, and you want to load it immediately, be it part of the normal load of the page, then you would say client load. Client idle is idle for load item requests. So something that will require JavaScript, but it's not, it doesn't come with a high priority. So that one, the client idle, is going to download the JavaScript for the component after the request either after the load event by the browser. So the browser finishes, loading everything else as an idle client. It will then grab the JavaScript for the component where you edit the client idle attribute. Client visible, we saw that. Client media, very interesting one, allows you to pass in a CSS media query. So this is very useful for situations where if someone's looking at your page on mobile, maybe they don't even see an entire section that requires JavaScript. And now you can tell your application to actually load or not load the JavaScript based on CSS media queries. Client only requires you to specify the framework that you want to load. So for example, client only React means that it's going to, it's not going to apply server-side on the page, but it's going to load the entire library of the, for you specify. So in this case, it just load the entire React library into the project as well. That's the least favorable one to use, by the way. Probably use the private folder. Okay, so does this make sense? So you can bring any component, any stuff from any other, not any other framework, but from the listed frameworks, and then you can essentially tell Astro when and how to load the JavaScript for the component. Now there's one more step which I'm kind of ignoring. You have to add the React integration. So all you need to do is install an astro.js/React, and there's an actual command. Okay, so this one, npx astro add and then React lint view whatever. And if you run this, it will actually automatically append the Astro configured.js file. So you don't need to add any of this. So it's going to add this import, and it's going to add the, it's going to update the integrations array. And by the way, Tailwind is not something that I've done manually. There's also npx astro add Tailwind, and it's going to configure it for you as well.
Is it going to use a specific version of Preact, or is it like the
I think it's going to be whatever the latest is. I think 18.2 is the latest, right?
But I'm allowed to use any version of Preact.
I don't know that. Check looks like that.
So your example, the image gallery was added to the DOM, but was lacking some interactivity until it was scrolled into view.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, good, yeah. So if you stop the delete. So you see it loads some of the images, it's definitely part of the DOM. I think I changed this to do, yeah, it does lazy loading the images as well, so that's why it's not all the images, but actually I don't want to load some of them maybe. loads 1, 2, 3, 4. I think there are 5 images. Oh, yeah, okay. So it also lazy loading also applies to when you spike. But yeah, when it comes into the viewport, that's when you what's the term? That's when you hydrate the and that's when the whole React runtime gets added to the page as well. Okay, and the whole thing works. And if you if I now would create a React project, install Swiper dependency, this would work in the React project. Okay. Last bit, image optimization, and this is where we enter sort of the experimental territory, but that's the last thing I want to talk to you about. So, image optimization of Astro. So this is a new thing in Astro. So that's not how you would do image or asset management in Astro, not even in 2.0. This is 2.1 onwards. So they introduce this new concept of assets, which also comes with a folder that is reserved for assets. So in source assets, you can put files, or you can also do subfolders, etc. But whatever you put in there is going to be exposed by Astro assets. And so the one thing to notice here is that there is a built-in image component as of version 2.1 in Astro, which you will import from Astro assets. And sorry, one more thing. If you want to use these assets, you would go to Astro config and you need to add experimental assets true, otherwise this won't work. But again, in the docs it says, this is experimental, we have that the other one is production and being changed. The usual disclaimer is there. So once you've done this, then you can import the image component. You can also import any of your images from the assets folder, and you can give them a name. I think I have it as a homework for you to actually console log any of these to see what you get, because you will actually get an object that will have some properties. And then you can just use the image component to change the width, the height of the image. So essentially, image optimization is now built into Astro. So if you look at these images, if I go to, let's go with the first one, assets, Columbia JPEG. Yeah, you can't do that. So if I don't, okay, let's do this way. Image source is equal to assets. Oh, I'm on pages now.
You're just missing the E in the JPEG extension.
And I don't need. Okay, so I'm in pages. I need to go. I didn't create it. No, it's the image optimization. Yes. Why is this not? It wants to do it as text. Doesn't matter. That file is big. No, it's fine because it actually works when you use the image component, so that's fine. I'm just, what if I do that? Probably that's still not going to. Okay, let's do it in another way. I'm just going to go and open that file. This is in development. But it won't show the size on the actual weight of the. Maybe we want to do it this way. Where my city, JS, complete, public, not public, source, assets. So 3.2 megabytes, right? That's the original size, and the original dimensions are here 4,000 by 3,000 pixels. But notice that this one is obviously not that big, because this file is only 27 kilobytes. Okay, so obviously that's a combination of two things. First of all, the image gets reduced in size, so it's only with 400. There is currently there's a bug, again, experimental features. This actual file is not a JPEG, it's a WebP. Okay, so they actually changed they changed the format from JPEG to WebP, but there's a bug and it shows up as a JPEG. But it is actually a WebP file. Okay. And you can do very nice performance optimizations just by using the built-in Astro image component. Right? This is very nice. You can change the width and height, and you can generate very optimal images. Right? So 3.2 megabytes to whatever it was, 27 kilobytes. That's a very great improvement. The other thing that I have in this file is a cloud image. Who here knows what cloud is? A couple of you, okay. So Cloudinary, and in full disclosure, I work in Cloudinary, so you get the 2-minute pitch. But Cloudinary is a so it's a cloud-based service where you can upload your images and videos. You get an access URL, and then we can transform, optimize, and otherwise manipulate these image assets. Okay? So the reason why I have this example is because if you're just after some very basic image optimization, then the Astro image component, which just keep an eye out on that because it may change. That's also experimental. Just remember that. That's good. But what if you have some more sort of advanced things that you want to do? Now, I did create a Cloudinary image component. It's really hacky, so I think I put it in the workshop notes. Don't use this in production, because it's just for the purpose of this project. But what I have here as an example is the following. Let me go back here and get rid of find face true. And let's see what happens. Okay. So I shrink this image down to 250 by 250, but it looks very ugly. Okay, now one of the, or not ugly, so it looks very distorted, right? And so one of the features of Cloudinary, I'll just pull that back, is that we can actually generate a thumbnail and we can automatically find face or faces of people, images, and we can create a crop around that. So if I just put that back, it's going to generate a different image on Cloudinary. So now the crop happens around the face automatically. Okay? That's one example. Another example, I call this the kitchen example, AI crop is equal to true. So let's imagine that we have a picture of an image. Again, it's a little bit distorted. One of Cloudinary's recent addition is content-aware cropping. So I can now ask Cloudinary to crop this image around the refrigerator, the microwave, or the sink. Okay, so I'm just going to, I forgot how I edit this in this code. So I'm telling you this is all. Okay, so I need to pass in a target. So if I say target is sink, then now the crop is on the sink. If I do microwave, then the crop is around the microwave. Magic. Okay. And I learned the best example for last. So this one is very tricky to do. It uses where's the code for that? So it actually uses a lot of lots of transformations, but it uses what is called displacement maps. I can add probably I've already done that. A link to the Cloudinary docs to actually will explain it to you in a very nice way what that is. But what you can do, you can take a brief image and you can overlay any logo and any text on top of it, and it, it looks like as if this T-shirt was photographed with this logo and with the text, but that's not the case. And to prove it to you, we're now going to change this from City.js to Astro, and I'm just going to use the Astro logo as my overlay, and now we just generated a new image with those things, as if this would be photographed again with this logo. Okay. So, and by the way, all these images as well. So obviously, all these three images, as you can see, are written as AVIFs, even though the original asset. If I just remove all of this, the original asset is this one. That's a JPEG. Right, so it comes back as a JPEG, but then once I add, actually what I need to do is call f-auto-enqueue, which is automatic format and automatic quote reduction, and now I'm going to get an AVIF. And then the rest of those transformations were added just to, create a thumbnail crop around the face and make it 250 by 250, zoom out 5%, so it kind of zoomed away from the face, and that's when you get this 4 kilobyte profile picture, right? And I could have lengthened this as well, radius max, and now it's going to be a nice little round. Okay. Questions?
Astro is more of a multi-page application, so can we use it like a fast value load once and then just navigate our own multi?
It's either the render everything at build time, also several years, or you can do the hybrid with the export const pre-rendering also true, but you don't have this single page application model.
What happens if a React component has a lot of JS, right? Like takes, I don't know, like 30 seconds or can you like show something?
Then optimize the React application first, and then optimize. Can you show something like a loading indicator?
Yeah, but like it's loading.
I don't know for sure. I'm sure you can do something.
We can do that in React.
Yeah. But don't forget we are going to fix it.
But the user can actually use it.
Always blame the user. And it's a feature, not a bug, right? Any other questions? Okay. So just a reminder, so again, here's the, hopefully you all got that, here's the GitHub repo again. So github.com/tpirs/astro-workshop. This is the full-blown app. Here are some of the notes, broken down our lessons. There are some links, in these files to Astro doors, to planning doors, to whatever CMS that I use. And again, you could theoretically just, clone this, install the dependencies and run it. There are two menu items that will not work about the products and the GraphQL, right? Because that uses CMS that's on the machine. Other than that, everything else should theoretically work. Also, one more thing, because I think there's a section here. And there should be a section in the blog somewhere about deployment. You can deploy, Astro to Netlify, Dino, Cloudflare, and there's a list of providers. Again, all you need to do is specify the provider. In this particular example, I deployed it to Netlify. Okay, so then you would have to have an adapter, but this gets configured automatically for you. Okay, so this project was deployed to Netlify. So if I go to here, I think it's this one. Older, maybe older. Yeah, this is, I think, older green section. But right, this is the app itself that we saw. or at least a version of it that I kind of changed last minute because change stuff last minute. But everything else here works, right? So this is now being coded. Okay. Well, thank you. That's all I had. In here, you have my LinkedIn, you have my portfolio, website, whatever you want to call it. If you have any question about Astro or anything else, later on in time, feel free to contact me and
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. But it's already live stream on the YouTube channel. Hello. And if you want, you can go to the YouTube channel and you can watch it again. I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy it a lot. So you can watch it again once more.
And here you love videos again.
Any questions? I have to say there is pizza at the back. The food is sponsored by Brilio. So if you want some pizza, then you can have some more questions with Tamas. He's gonna be there. He's also speaking tomorrow or Thursday.
I'm speaking Thursday.
Yeah, Thursday. So we have a meetup.
But not about Astro.
No. What is the talk about?
It is about image optimization and image formats and common mistakes.
The biggest mistake of image optimization is Microsoft bought everything in Edge. It's still bought.
That's not what I'm going to say, but
That's an opinion.
no, but that's, yeah, because image optimization is it's easy when you have to get it right, like AVIF, right? So let's just go with that example. AVIF is very fast, it's good, it's going to be a fraction of the size of any JPEG, but because AVIF was created from a video codec, the AV1 format, it doesn't support progressive loading. So even if it loads fast, you're going to see nothing, and then loop the AVIF. Also, if you do what is called low fidelity encoding for AVIF, you're going to lose a lot of contextual data. So if you have like a picture of a t-shirt or of a bag, you're going to lose the fine details. Is that what you want? Then fine, but you need to understand the consequences of that. So that's yeah, that's what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to do it.
That's good. You got a bit of a piece of it. And we're going to be live streaming it as well, so you can watch it online as well from our YouTube channel. Thank you. You came all the way from Spain, by the way.